All right. So, my name is James Sirois. Welcome. I'm just about to present the meaning crisis and its solutions. And just to give you a bit of background on who I am, I'm a Canadian filmmaker and philosopher. I'm also a writer, and I've done a bit of work in various fields. So, I'm just putting together a few of my ideas to tackle the meaning crisis, but also bring some solutions to the table. So I'm going to do a quick snapshot overview so anyone who's listening can really get a really quick look at what I'll be diving into throughout this presentation. And you can decide from there if it has any value to you or not. But I do think that I will bring up some points that are quite new and or original, which is one of the reasons I'm going to be making this presentation. And in general, I'm being very comprehensive. So that being said, I'm going to try not to go down too many philosophical rabbit holes because this, can go on forever. So that's the beauty and the ugly of philosophy. But the idea here is to be very pragmatic, to give a bit of a good look at what the meaning crisis is, but also how we can resolve some of these challenges. So for the regular person, right? So not just people who are into the public intellectual sphere and or organizations that are relevant to this. So I do think it's very important. We need to disseminate some of this information and share ideas and come to terms with how we define things and what the issues are and how we can approach them, both as institutions and as individuals and as a culture. So to get that conversation started, I'm going to do my best to make it not too simple, but let's just say um, relatable. So let's start with the quick snapshot view. Um, Visually here, the structure of this presentation is that there's challenges and there's solutions, and we're just going to go through both challenges and solutions and discuss them. So here we go. We have the snapshot overview. I'm going to get through these really quickly because we're going to be discussing them anyway, but anybody is welcome to pause the video and look at these and see what kind of presentation this is going to be. So the first one, we have a challenge of defining meaning as a philosophical difficulty. I don't think anybody's really putting in enough time and effort into defining what meaning is. And I do think there's value in covering that. We do need to understand what meaning is and come to some kind of consensus as to how we're supposed to attain it. So without knowing what it is and how it works, I do think that we're wasting some valuable time and energy trying to do things that may actually not help us with the meaning crisis. Second, we have here, of course, identifying where the problem is. So, of course, everyone is going to be saying it's technology, but how is technology causing problems? And I don't think it's one thing, it's many things at the same time. So, we should go a bit deeper into that. And I think a lot of people need to know why and how technology is interfering in our lives and reducing meaning. Then we have the freedom to pursue meaning. So uh, we'll dive into how even religion and culture can be political and is political on some level, and that it kind of constrains us to pursue meaning in the ways that we require. So it's kind of ironic because we can either um, be too free, which can also reduce meaning, and that's one of the challenges here as well, or be too constrained to pursue meaning. So in this one, we're going to dive into what that means. Then we have the poor are aware and trapped versus the rich experience chaos. Um, so I'm not a fan of identity politics, but we do need to look at some of these things that are happening. And of course, um, when I'm referring to the poor, I'm referring to anybody who doesn't have access to devices and or the internet. So, that's still more than a billion people on the planet. I'm sure 2 or 3 billion. So that's very necessary. We need to understand how it's impacting them and how it will impact them once they do get access, because they will get access and very quickly. And then we need to understand how the rich are experiencing chaos insofar as anybody who has the internet and data is at the forefront of this meaning crisis, obviously. So, but yeah, we're gonna dive into that. Then we have freedom itself. So, like I just mentioned earlier, we have a little bit of a problem philosophically insofar as we're seeing too much freedom lead to meaninglessness. So, I'll discuss that a bit more within this presentation. And then finally, we have here increasing our capability for meaning over pursuit of meaning. So, I don't think the meaning crisis is going to be solved by just looking for meaning, right? We need to define what it is first. We need to understand how it's being interrupted. But really, most of all, I think the requirement is going to be to increase our capability to feel meaning and to just to lead meaningful lives. Because if we really are going to be seeing a brave new world, then we're going to change how we live, and we're already living radically different than we did 100 years ago, and prior to that for the rest of human history. So that's this paradigm shift is going to require that we expand our capabilities. So we're going to discuss what that means a little bit. And then finally, we have the solutions. So in the solutions, you can look at every solution and start to take apart what's problematic with that solution as well. So, we're not going to go down those roads too much because, again, the whole point of this presentation is to be comprehensive. And so that's what we're going to do without, so that people can really get a good idea of what's going on and just sort of have a starting point to the meaning crisis. So I leave debate up for others afterwards. Here, the first one we have: the drive for meaning exists. It is not a problem of motivation. So I think it's important to actually look at that and say, hey, it's not a problem that we have to solve. There is motivation there. The problem or the challenge is how do we funnel that, or how do we channel that motivation properly? But it's there, and that's a good thing. Second is the investment in the mental health sector. We're seeing that happen. It's being pushed a bit more culturally, which is good. But we don't actually have, we're not equipped insofar as we haven't organized mass investment. And when I say investment, it doesn't necessarily have to be economic. It can just be people and their willingness to, make mental health a part of their lives in a way that's proactive. So we're going to discuss that. But it is happening, and it is possible to invest in mental health in ways that are really going to be beneficial for us. So that's a good thing. Then we have asking people what the solutions are. So pooling the wisdom is something that we far too seldom actually invest in. So because the meaning crisis is something that's going to be relevant to everyone, we need to ask everyone. Different people on different continents and different cultures perceive and experience the world in different ways. So there's definitely always a treasure trove of wisdom there to be tapped, and we don't do it enough to actually tap it. Then we have philosophy as a starting point to reboot religion. All right, so online we're seeing this revival of thought in a way. It's kind of like a renaissance insofar as people are listening to podcasts, they're studying, they're discussing all over the place different things on different levels. And so we are seeing a very religious time, perhaps the most religious era of human history. People are experimenting and so on. So we need to maybe try to clarify and contextualize how we are philosophizing and how it can be used as a starting point to reboot religion. So there was a time when Christopher Hitchens was doing these discussions and on these panels about 20 years ago, and there was a public discussion around religion. And I think we need to do that again, and we are doing it. We're just not realizing that we should do it a bit more formally. And then we have education. So I'll discuss a little bit more about this model of education. But I did quickly mention it, that people are educating themselves. We have the platforms for it. And now I think we just need to come up with a new structure, and we'll dive into what that means as well. And then we have Japan's merging of the old world and the new tools. So they have a concept called ikigai, and I think this is a good way of achieving meaning. And we'll just have to adapt it to the new world that we're sort of facing here as we move forward with these new technologies. All right. So I hope this first 10 minutes hasn't been too dense and I don't speak too quickly. I'm not very used to lecturing and recording myself, so I hope you understand that, but I'll do my best to slow down and be a bit more fluid. So there it is. And breathe. So I'll breathe in the mic there. But yeah, we got to be more human. We're talking about meaning here, so it's very important to stay aware about what we need, and I need to breathe more. So, we have the snapshot overview done. I'd like to move more into the general overview. So, in this, I just want to start off by contextualizing what the crisis is and how it emerged. And then, obviously, the rest of the presentation is going to be diving into the challenges and the solutions that we've just snapshot overviewed. And in the end, we could do a big picture conclusion, as well as I'll be presenting a solution of my own, a project that I began with my dear friend Bettina to counteract some of this meaning crisis stuff. All right, so what is the meaning crisis and how did it emerge? So we're going to look here at the loss of purpose, the loss of community, the influence of identity politics. The crisis means chaos and what that means. Freedom and chaos, exponential technology, and the great supplanting. So let's do these one by one here. Loss of purpose. So we have this erosion, and the erosion of purpose seems to happen. And when I say the rich class, I'm really just talking about anybody who has access to technology and to information and to anything that they can consume. So if you're capable of spending more than 6 to 8 hours a day on your devices, just consuming entertainment, that's what I mean by the rich class. So the loss of purpose, this is the most general one, the one we all seem to know, so I don't need to explicate that too much. But obviously that's a type of hedonism, and the more pacified you are with being entertained and to just sort of enjoying yourself, the more the lack of a desire to accept responsibility sets in, and humans need responsibility in order to feel fulfilled and meaningful. So we know how that works. We just have more time on our hands, and these devices and these platforms really incentivize us to stay on them for longer and longer periods of time. And that leads to, of course, the loss of community. So, it's strange because we have new communities that are occurring online. Case in point, the whole reason I'm doing this presentation is because I was encouraged to do so by a good friend of mine who I've met through an online community. It's a philosophical community called the Theories of Everything community. It's a podcast that Kurt Jamunko in Toronto started. It's very brilliant stuff. And then, I came together and met people that are quite like-minded, right? So it creates community as well, but you lose community insofar as community is meant to bring people together in a physical way, and so that you can enjoy life in base reality, right? Community online it's communicative. It's almost exclusively just sharing ideas and thoughts. So there's a loss of community there, but also there's an incentivization for individualism. And by that, I don't mean, the individual having autonomy. I'm an individualist very strongly on that point, but there's a sort of more solipsistic incentivization. Like, you need to do everything on your own. You need to be, powerful and everything. And you don't need anyone. And that kind of individualism I'm against. So being autonomous is one thing, being an individual in that way is another. So, demonizing the nuclear family as well in different ways. Again, I don't want to talk about politics too much or be be going down the road of identity politics, but there are some clear forces, it's self-evident, that are popularizing this idea that, like polyamory, for example. Now, whether it's being influenced by a certain group or not, that's really not something I care to discuss. It's just something that we can observe quite clearly. But the idea that this is one of the examples, polyamory is getting more and more popular, it's gaining traction, and this leads to the erosion of the nuclear family, which in turn leads to the erosion of the loss of community. So then there's the influence of identity politics. Oh, and by the way, any of this stuff can be debated. So if someone says, "Look, that's wrong, and here's why," that's completely fine. And this is the whole point. We have to have a starting point to discussion. This isn't a like this is what the meaning crisis is, and I'm sure of it, and I'm inflexible. I just want to bring up these points. Uh, okay, moving on. Then we have the influence of identity politics. So now I can discuss exactly why I don't want to get into in identity politics is because it fractures society into intersectional tribes. So that's quite obvious, right? If you use identity as a marker to um, enact some kind of agency in society, you're going to divide people into groups by identity versus dividing people into meritocracy, which seems to be the only thing that works, where we say, okay, if you can get things done, it has nothing to do with any other identity marker, but you merit it because you're proving yourself. So that's really the extent of that. But the point is, if we do bring in all these other identity markers, it starts getting really chaotic and fractures a community. Then we have the crisis means chaos. So here I've written existential threat due to mass formation psychosis, de facto nihilism, and anti-natalism. Okay, so what does it mean to have a meaning crisis? It means chaos, right? And that more specifically is that it leads to existential threat. Why? Because, well, when we're fractured as a community and we've lost purpose and meaning as an entire culture, like we're seeing in the West at the moment, we turn to war, and there's mass formation psychosis, which is basically brainwash on a scale of hundreds of millions of people, like we saw in World War II. So that's a very dangerous thing, because when you start to have a brainwashing effect on that level, well, you need a purpose to drive the power forward, or to give it some direction. And so how do you do that? You need an enemy. And this is what happened once again in World War II. So if you rally people around, what do you rally them around? Well, you rally them around a tribal identity, and a tribal identity always needs to have an enemy so that it has a purpose to exist. So this chaos is quite literally leading into an existential threat. So then we have just de facto nihilism and anti-natalism. So paradoxically, because the chaos that's starting to happen in many different ways, many different tribal groups, it hasn't coalesced into one group yet, or one that's powerful enough. So we still have nihilism, which is just not really having any integrated belief and purpose in your own life as an individual yet. So once we have a major tyrannical power that gives you a purpose, then you're fine, because you say, well, this is my purpose I've been given as the individual within this community. So until then, you're aimless. Okay. And then antinatalism. So if you're aimless, it's very easy to say, well, I don't believe in anything. This is all chaotic. It's shit. And then you just start to take on a position of arrogance, which is antinatalism. You believe that human beings aren't worth being around. One, you don't have any purpose in your life, and Therefore, that must mean there is no purpose to life. And three, if there's no purpose to life, or at least human life, then we should just die off, especially because we're screwing up everything else. So that's clearly very anti-meaning and is a byproduct of the meaning crisis. So we need to examine how do we get out of that as well. But it is how it emerged a little bit, right? Is identity politics and so on. Then we have here freedom and chaos. The irony of freedom leading away from order and peace into loss of religion. Nietzsche and Jung. So we'll discuss this more in the challenges and stuff, but generally, this is where we can start to have a bit of a structure or a timeline to understand how the meaning crisis emerged. So lately it emerged because we've had a loss of purpose in community and identity politics making things much worse and so on. But really, it's begun with a freedom of thought, which of course sounds like I'm saying it's not a good thing, but no, it is. It's just we have to realize that the moment you have freedom, you also have a responsibility to do something with that freedom, or to suffer the consequences of not doing anything with this new freedom that you have. And so it's ironic because what happens is when you have freedom, well, you feel you typically it comes with less responsibilities, and less responsibilities makes it so that you want to go out there and do whatever you want or cause some kind of trouble and adversity, because as human beings we need resistance in order to grow and to feel like we are moving forward. So you'll create chaos just to grow. You'll throw yourself into chaos subconsciously. And so this is something that Jung has explained in various ways, and Nietzsche, while he explained it less on the level of the individual like Jung did, but more on the level of society and cultures. So he predicted that this freedom from God, meaning that we're no longer believers, is going to lead to more chaos. So we should look into Nietzsche and Jung in a big way to really try to help us understand what's happening. It's always a good idea. All right, then we have exponential technology. I'm going to take another breath. I tend to hold my breath for some reason when I'm doing these lectures, and then I ramble too much. Okay, exponential technology, creating the useless class, pushing humanity to adapt beyond its capability to adapt. So I wrote personal proof here, although I can't remember. Maybe it has to do with my own life insofar as adapting. Yeah, okay, I'll explain that in a sec. So obviously the fear that's being brought on and the meaning crisis is being fueled by this fear of the fact that technology is exponentially changing things in a way that is no longer like the frog in boiling water example. It's more like immediate. We sense, oh my god, this was a certain way last month and now it's entirely different. So we're seeing these massive changes, and that's caused by exponential technology, meaning that it's just getting faster and faster in a non-linear way. It's exponential. So a lot of the people in the community that I'm a part of will know what I mean by that. Ray Kurzweil discusses this at a great length, and many others. But the cause of technology being exponential really pushes humanity to needing to adapt. And what it's adapting to isn't necessarily clear, and we don't know if it's going to be something that's useful. So, for example, you might think to yourself, "Oh, this might be a good time to be coding." In fact, not so long ago, that was a bit of a trope online. I'm not sure if trope is the right word, but people were saying learn to code. And now AI is completely surprised us, and that seems to be one of the first things that it's automating is coding. So, you know, 10 years ago, you could have adapted by saying, well, everything is computers nowadays. So I'm going to learn how to code. And now you're thinking, well, I guess I have to adapt and learn how to prompt. But then something else might come along, and because you're aware that things are changing so quickly, you might think to yourself, is it really going to be worth adapting to exponential technology to try to keeping up with it? And maybe I'm going to have to go an entirely different route and go completely human sector, right? Do something that technology has no bearings on. And of course, we can't all throw ourselves into that. And so there's all these questions surrounding that. But really, what's even more dangerous is having to adapt. It's not just a matter of adapting to make a living; it's adapting to how you're going to live. So, uh, if you have freedom, if you have more resources, because technology has somehow made us wealthier and we can do whatever we want, and I'm seeing that happening quite quickly in interesting ways. I was in Colombia recently for about 6 months, and I met people who have no clue how to invest, no software skills whatsoever, no coding, no nothing, but they have certain cryptocurrency investments, and it allows them to live in Colombia. So uh, the question then becomes, how do you adapt to different cultures and different languages and different modes of being and living when you can sample so many so quickly? And that kind of adaptation is very difficult for a lot of people. I mean, I grew up that way, and even for me, it was difficult. So I just spent 4 years living in different countries. So like six of them over 4 years. So always having to move and adapt and learn the new system, the bureaucracy of it, the culture, the language. It's a very difficult thing because we need to integrate as human beings. We need to be integrated in a community. So when you're shifting in different ways, and I was shifting in the ways that won't necessarily be something that everybody does, but it's my personal proof that it's not easy, and that adapting to an exponential world is perhaps the wrong move. That we're really going to need to slow down because it is going fast, and we're going to discuss that more later. Then we have the great supplanting. What did I write here? Power structures vying for control by supplanting meaning with pleasure. Okay, so I'm not. There's no conspiracy behind that. It's just what's happening, um, by osmosis or implicitly or whatever. So the idea is that it makes economic sense for people to just enjoy themselves and to spend more time consuming different products and experiences. So we're supplanting meaning with pleasure and meaning with responsibility. Really, responsibility is, like I said earlier, necessary to our lives. Um, but go and tell people, look, you should go and sacrifice yourself in such and such a way, or take responsibility for someone else. It's much easier to say, hey, you should enjoy yourself, and here's how. And so that's how we end up supplanting meaning without even realizing it. Goes back to hedonism, right? So how can hedonism be sustainable? And we can discuss that a little bit more later as well. So there it is. That's the major, um, I guess, contextualization of the meaning crisis. So I'm hoping that everything is clear so far and that you're following along. And if you have any questions or concerns or anything you want to debate, please feel free to write them down and send me a message if you'd like. And then next, we're going to move forward into the challenges. All right. So let's dive into this. Here, I just want to thank my friend Daniel Varga. He's working on a very important theory called jumping continuity theory, and he's been helping me with these AI images. So this one right here is supposed to demonstrate the challenges of the meaning crisis. How do we move our Earth forward? How do we move our civilization through this meaning crisis? First, I want to say that it's about uh, looking at it as a challenge and not a problem. Okay. And you can look at it as a crisis, sure, but I like to look at it as a journey as well. I'm not one for being politically correct or telling people what they should think or say or use like words, but I'm just trying to say that personally, I really like the idea of looking at it as a challenge through a journey because it makes it easier to move forward and be positive, right? Personally. So let's look into that. We have here the first challenge, defining meaning as a philosophical difficulty. All right. So, um, here I've written, is it a feeling? If so, how do we identify this feeling? Okay, whether it's a feeling or a thought or an emotion, at the end of the day, we know that meaning is required and necessary. And it's not so important to say that it's a feeling. It could just be a state. I don't want to split hairs philosophically too much, but really the more important part is to use a word, and I'm going to use the word feeling. So is that feeling sustainable? So we know that feelings are fleeting typically, but there's a really great word that the Greeks used called eudaimonia, which is sort of a transcendent feeling. It's to give you a good example. If I were to be having the worst day of my life, right? I just got dumped by my girlfriend, got fired at work, and my mother died, all in one day or in 1 week or month or whatever. I, you know, Anybody in that moment could be asking me, are you happy in your life? And I'd say yes, without hesitation. Now, clearly, I'm not happy in the moment insofar as my emotions are fleeting, but that eudaimonia is a sense of meaning. It's a sense of happiness, a direction, or an ikigai, like the Japanese have. Uh, so it has no bearing on your day to day fluctuating emotions, right? Meaning is something that's transcendental in some way with through this idea of eudaimonia. It's fulfillment. It's greater than our bodily kind of daily feelings. So you know I think it's sustainable when you reach it, but you can lose it. I mean, some people go through 10 or 15 years of a career and then all of a sudden they lose meaning. And then they can find it again, right? In a new path, or they shift their personality or their perception of the changes in their career, and they're able to evolve in some way. So I do think that it is sustainable, it's possible. But it's not sustainable if you don't have the capability of integrating it and of finding it in the first place, obviously. So, this is something that I don't think people are aware of enough, and that we need to educate people about that it is possible, because we have a great suicide rate. Um, I don't know if it's brought on by meaninglessness, but I would imagine so. It's brought on by many reasons, but I do think there are some people that are lost in that way. So, um, the question is, if they're going to be educated, is that something that is possible philosophically, or do they need religion? Do they need some kind of activity? What? How can people start to understand that meaning is greater than this fluctuating thing? And does it require higher order thinking? So if it does, then really the question becomes one of identity politics again. Are you smart enough to have meaning in your life? And I would say, in fact, the opposite might be true, that people who are quite intelligent have a difficulty of finding meaning for various reasons. This is starting to get off track, so I don't want to go down that road too much. But really, what's important is, I believe that you don't need to have any sophisticated understanding of what meaning is. You just need to be guided into being able to integrate certain things into your life, and then you will have that meaning. As long as you understand that you're not chasing an emotion, and that anybody can understand. So it's really about enabling people. Then we have here communal meaning versus individual meaning. So we'll discuss that too. Um, how to balance logistical operation of societies and the optimization of individual meaning. So it might be a balancing act. There might not be, but we have those two things, those two levels of meaning, right? So the individual and the community, they're tied together. So the community emerges out of the individual. There's a certain sense of meaning that we can integrate by being part of a community. So obviously, I'm Canadian, and if there's a strong Canadian identity, it gives me meaning as an individual citizen, right? I feel, I'm supporting my hockey team at the Olympics, and there you go. So having that communal meaning is an issue, and it is something that we have to take into consideration when we define meaning, because especially today, because we're globalizing more. There's a global community. It becomes more chaotic, and of course, there's a push against uh, nationalism, and then there's on the other side a push for nationalism, and we're debating whether that's good or bad, and all these different things. And really, it's both good and bad. I mean, if you have, for example, nationalism, which is just a comprehensive circle that includes the citizens, then it creates a sense of identity and meaning for those citizens. But then it excludes anyone who aren't citizens and they're outside of the nation. So, this is why some people say, well, you got to be a globalist, man. And it's true. You got to also have that circle, and perhaps there's a need for concentric circles that keeps including people in different ways, but also maintains an integrity on the smaller levels, because we're not designed to identify with everyone and everything in every place. So, meaning is very, very much related to these different levels, whether you see it as a municipal level, um, provincial or state, nation, continent, culture, religion, language. These are all different tribes, and we need to understand how we can perhaps move forward and retain that communal meaning without losing the individual meaning, because this is what happens with tyrannical systems. They say, okay, your entire we're going to do away with individual meaning, like in North Korea, for example, at the moment, and we're just going to focus on you being a community member, and that will solve all of your meaning problems, and your purpose and your whole life is just going to be regimented. So we want to avoid that, and we know why. Um, so I'm not going to discuss that too much. But on the other side, the individual meaning, it's about being able to see yourself as an agent that has its own free will, free thought, its own experience, its own valid point of view and desires. So we have to maintain that. It's very important, because again, we've seen how things can be tyrannical if we just go and focus on communal meaning. But at the same time, there's downsides to individual meaning as well. I mean, if it's just you and everyone, and you're against the world, um, you got to be autonomous and independent, and you don't need to be responsible for anybody else. Then you realize that you've isolated yourself, and we're social creatures. So meaning as an individual is about trying to understand who you are, having the freedom to be introspective and to see yourself in relation to your community. So keeping that balance. So I think this is a good way of defining what meaning is and how it works. So, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be these philosophical debates, and I think these are the things that I've just said. I think we can mostly agree on. I don't think there would be that much debate there. Uh, and so, how can we reduce debate, or at least come to a consensus when it comes to different issues? We need universals, and that means finding things that we have no choice but to agree. It's like logic, right? And I know some people can move against logic, but at the end of the day, these kinds of anomalies they go away real fast, because impossible to sustain them. So there are some universals, and the ones that are intrinsic to humanity, as I've written here, are that we are social creatures, which makes us familial. We need family, and even if you don't have a family, you'll make one for yourself in some way, and communal bonds. So just being social to begin with, we can realize it's something that is universal about humans. And yes, there will always be some people who are more hermit or antisocial, but at the end of the day, they're not that relevant because, well, I mean, there aren't that many, and really what they care about is being alone anyway. So that's quite possible. Um, so that really does that for defining meaning as a philosophical difficulty. Uh, it's challenging, but at the end of the day, we need to look at it as something that can be done. And I think I created a bit of a starting point, which is a bit of a solution to this challenge. And but it's an ongoing discussion, and that's why it remains a challenge. We need to know what is this transcendental meaning. How do we achieve it? How do we maintain balance between the individual and the community? And what are the universals? Because I don't think I've really thought enough about what that could entail. There might be more. And so that does it for that. Let's move on. We have challenge 2. Okay, then this one is going to be a bit longer, and I'm going to try to slow down. So here, we want to identify where the problem is. Oh, there's a typo here. Where he problem is. Ah, there's a T. Okay, well, that's where the problem is. Okay, we need to use a multi-pronged approach, because there are many different kinds of problems, and that's what complexifies the issue. So we're going to start here with the technology itself. Here I've written a bunch of different things. So the first one is, it is interfering in our lives by disrupting social imperatives and purpose. So it's just to really recap what we've discussed before. And it's the one thing that everyone knows by experience. So obviously, when you're on your device, you're on your phone, um, your your time goes by much faster, and you can socialize with more people quickly and with comfort and ease. So your imperative to go out and actually meet people and move around, it's just thwarted. I mean, it's bypassed. So we know that, and it's going even further. When you have, for example, Netflix, there's all these jokes about how you're going to spend 2 hours trying to look for a film, and then you're going to go to bed and you're not even going to watch the film. So we're not even capable of experiencing or having experiences, even with ourselves now, right? When you're watching a movie, it's still an experience that you're having with yourself in some way. So this is kind of a strange thing that technology does, and we need to tackle that somehow. I don't think we're going to be able to tackle it directly, like, hey, look, let's just force these platforms to not optimize playlists and stuff like that, or do the, now we can do that to some degree. I do think we need to, especially when it comes to kids who are having issues with self-image because of these filters on these platforms and things like that. We can tweak the technology to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen too much. But at the end of the day, I think the incentive isn't going to come from the technology itself. It's going to have to come from somewhere else. Um, you know, like Tinder, for example, these dating apps. They incentivize people to meet offline, but ironically, what happened was the opposite. It's an ego boost, and people don't meet, and they're actually afraid to meet each other because of being online all the time anyway, and not being used to actually having interactions. So really, it's kind of like a feedback loop, or a positive feedback loop, that that just keeps making things worse. Okay, so it's got to come from another place that's not technology oriented. Um, Coming together and work. So desensitivity due to overstimulation. Another thing we know quite clearly with by experience, right? We watch movies. We're getting ding 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 notifications from all these different apps at the same time, and we're becoming desensitized in different ways. But at the same time, we're becoming um, what's the word? Fried. We're just becoming fried. Too much stimulation. So, but then there's something a bit deeper. We're drowning in symbols. So when we saw Matrix movies come out, they really brought together a whole new perception of what it means to live in a virtual world. And Jean Baudrillard, he's the philosopher that actually kind of inspired the film with a book that he wrote called Simulacra and Simulation. And I think I'm going to discuss this later anyway, so I don't want to get into it too deeply. But he discusses how we are really doing away with absence. So we're being exposed to so much information and symbols. And this was back in his day, was in the 70s. Uh, there was just TV and radio. Now we have the internet. But back then, even the exposure to information and to symbols, it's it's uh, it's creating the absence of absence. And so there's a really interesting philosophical point of view that he has that I think we need to really take seriously, because to know what is real and what is not real is a major problem, especially with these new generations, Gen Z. Uh, there seems to be some conflation between the online virtual world versus the base reality world, and that conflation causes obviously some issues, because, well, you can't be and or do what you normally do online in the real world. You cannot behave in certain ways in the real world, and yet they're trying to. So, but also just loss of meaning in general, of course, keeping the main theme of this afloat. Uh, if there's so many symbols and these symbols are just reflecting other symbols, and everything is just a representation of other things, then we're losing any kind of background for meaning. There's no contrast. And so it's much deeper philosophically, it's much more abstract, and yet it is something that we feel in our day-to-day lives. So I'm getting very philosophical here, but um, we have a lot of misinformation and disinformation as well, so we don't even know what to trust is real. So this is another issue that is, again, by experience. We don't need to go down that road too much. But due to that, we now have the inability to think critically about the information that we are exposed to. And so we no longer have trust. And when you don't have trust in a society, then you can't solve something like the meaning crisis, or an economic crisis, or any of it. You cannot come to solve anything because there's no trust, and everyone is suspicious of everyone else. So that these are the major problems of technology that we're looking at now and feeling now. So it doesn't need to be explained that much because we're experiencing it, and that's not a good thing, because it means that there's no preventing the issue is already happened and happening. And how far and how long that will go is something that remains to be seen. But we have to treat it like it is an emergency, and it is. So, that being said, I've really established what people already discuss, but there's more. And one of it is population collapse. Again, another thing that's becoming more or increasingly, there's an awareness of it in popular culture, but still not popular enough. People need to realize that there's population collapse happening, not going to happen. So, and that is a major issue because, well, um, meaning is, I believe, inherently tied to community. as well, like we discussed earlier. And if you don't have a community to begin with, or those communities are becoming more sparse, then uh, you know there may be a meaninglessness to the point where you don't even see a point in trying to solve the population collapse problem, which is the anti-natalism thing I was saying. So this really just fuels the problem. And it's an issue because the population collapse thing cannot be faced head on. And yet we need to maintain it in our conscious awareness at all times, because any of these solutions that we're going to be trying to implement moving forward as a human society, it'll be meaningless if it's not geared towards being there to deal with these issues to begin with. So population collapse perhaps isn't being taken into account here with the meaning crisis. Um, there's that movie Children of Men, very famous movie. It's a great film that kind of shows you how meaningless things are if you don't have children, if there's no one around, if humanity won't survive beyond 50 years. Um, so there's that, but there's also the issue that, well, we need people around so that we can have the motivation to solve the issues of technology to begin with. So how do we do that? Very, very difficult problem. And then we have reality conflation, which is what I just talked about. But I have some examples here: gaming and social media. So this idea that you are something in one world and you're not in the other world, but you want to transfer those capabilities, uh, I think is uh, is caused by hacking reward systems, yeah, which is what I've written here. So um, you feel meaningful when you have, like, let's say you have more points than anyone else at a certain game and a certain level or something like that, right? So this feeling that you've achieved something, that's why you have these little achievement uh, notifications or whatever on video games, like cling, and it's so sophisticated that they tie it to sound, right? um for example, it could be as sophisticated as a water drop falling into water, boop, right? And the reason for that is because water means survival. So there's an attraction to water. There's a sense of success. So some applications or games have these little bloop sounds just to make you feel like, there's something important here, or there's something, you know what I mean? So there's lots of different little tactics that are being employed to hijack our primitive systems to pull us into these virtual worlds or these games, and making us feel like, hey, we're being rewarded for survival. But in fact, nothing happened. You didn't increase your health or your intelligence in any way. Well, maybe a little bit hand-eye coordination, and now we have esports, so you can make money with playing these games. And but these, even though your reward systems are being rewarded in real ways, for the majority of people, they're not being rewarded in real ways. And for those who are being rewarded, there it is debatable that those rewards aren't worth it. They're not worth you frying your brain, being exposed to these games and being online too much. So yeah, conflating the virtual world as better and or more important is something we need to step back and realize, hey, this is a major issue. Even though we realize, hey, that is how we can survive. A lot of people spend 8 hours a day working on online, right? And this is what allows them to eat. But this isn't good in many other ways. And we need to actually tell people how it's not good and how it's not sustainable. Even if it becomes indistinguishable from reality. If we have perfect simulations, you're still a body, you're still a human being. Um, where does the line get drawn? I mean, do you want to conflate the reality to the extent where you can pump someone filled with, you know, different kinds of medicines and foods that will allow them to stay immobile longer so that they can be in the simulation longer, or even tweak their genetics so that they can do it and live in the virtual reality longer, and then for what reason? And you know, these things sound crazy now, but a lot of the things that we're dealing with sounded crazy 20, 30 years ago. This is real things. Okay, we can tweak. That's called biohacking. We can tweak ourselves biologically, and the problem, the challenge is, are these tweaks are most likely going to, or it is a possibility that the tweaks that we will want to do to our bodies is so that we can live in this virtual reality longer. Um, and that might cause some massive problems. So this reality conflation issue is something we need to look at right now, before we start trying these new things, like brain to computer interfacing and so on. So then we have exponentiality. So um, self-explanatory, really, but the idea that we're constantly having to shift, and it's revolutionizing how we do things on a fundamental level, obviously is a massive problem, or challenge to keep up. So it just naturally creates an instability, and it might require that we adopt antiquated technology a little bit. I don't know, but that's going to be a difficult one to tackle. It's just a general one I had to include. Then we have here nefarious forces and ignorance. So we've discussed technology in different ways and how it's impacting us in different ways, right? But now we need to look at the politics a little bit in that way, and the economic interests. It's just the way it is, right? People will want to take advantage of making the most money that they can, and or um, having the most power that they can. How do we deal with that? It's another question that's open-ended, and I can go into this discussing that, but really it's an ongoing one, and again, kind of self-explanatory. Then we have globalization. So with this technology, we know that we have a greater risk of having tyrannical forces really, really enslave people in different ways. And in many ways, we already are, but it can get a whole lot worse. And the issue is, well, how are we going to maintain our freedom, and or just maintain our humanity in some ways? Uh, there's absolute control that can be done with these technologies, right? We've seen it with certain things like in China, right? Social credit system, you cannot travel and or buy certain products and or many other things if the government deems that you're not a model citizen. Just because everything is integrated, right? You can jaywalk and your bank account gets fined right away. So the banking system, the public transportation system, the healthcare, everything is integrated. It's all talking to each other. So one thing can impact another in this in a split second if the government wants you to. So obviously another issue, um, but necessary to make it known and be aware of it at all times. So yeah, and then generally too, we have to realize that globalization is inherently an issue insofar as having an having an international community and a culture and a political system and an economy has its downfalls as well, which is what we're seeing today. If there's no trust in the system, if there's no willingness to cooperate from somewhere on the planet, it causes issues everywhere, right? So it's really kind of difficult now to return to an entirely nationalistic model because we're integrated in many ways. So how are we going to share resources and move forward? Well, we're not. We're going to make these alliances and fight for them if we return to an entirely nationalistic model. But at the same time, if we move into a globalistic model where we need one system, well, that system is kind of by definition tyrannical because it's one system. And we've seen what happens when we try to create one system, but that's still free, like the European Union. It becomes corrupted very quickly, and it's chaotic, and it's very difficult to understand how to get things done. And so that experiment is sort of culminating into a well, this maybe isn't possible. So massive issue, uh, and technology is exacerbating it, and we need to try to understand how do we move forward by keeping that balance of freedom versus prosperity. So there it is. That's the second one. Um, we've identified a lot of different kinds of problems, but I think these are the main ones. They're the ones we have to take into account moving forward. And if we don't, I do think that that's going to be a problem, because when you try to fix one issue and you're neglecting the other, you seem to exacerbate it or create another problem. So I think we need to attack everything on a sort of multi-pronged approach, and this is possible. It's just that various groups and people have to be working on these things simultaneously and then communicate at the same time so that they're moving forward in a way that's productive and maintaining balance. So this is the main challenge, the overarching challenge, if you will, of all of these other sub challenges, if that's a good way to say it. All right. So then we have our third challenge. Here again, we have a bit of a typo. Freedom to pursue meaning politically. Right. It's a good segue into this, the last challenge, because we discussed how tyranny is possible with technology a little bit. I didn't go into depth too much because these are things that are quite easily already known, and or we can. There's a lot of different what can I say, documentaries and sources that have kind of explained a lot of those challenges. But now we can discuss a little bit more something that isn't being talked about, which is the freedom to pursue meaning. And so, really, in religion, for example, it's about. Well, first, let's define what it is. I think that religion is about giving you community, meaning, purpose, which are tied together, and we'll discuss that as well. Ritual and tradition. So these things, how you acquire them requires constraint. So they give you rules to follow, right, and to live by. And these rules are meant to help you achieve meaning and community and all these other things that I mentioned. So naturally, that means that there's a lack of freedom there. But we'll see, and I think I discussed this in another slide later on, that there is freedom in constraint. That's a bit of a paradox there. The point is, in religion, a lot of the people nowadays have committed apostasy, or they're becoming heretics, even though they're part of the religion. And this is because they're looking for more freedom to pursue the meaning that they're losing and that isn't being provided to them through their religion. So this has happened in various ways, just from the scientific things that we've discovered in the last couple hundred years, right? If we say, "Oh, look, it's proven. We have the proof that we're not the center of the universe. The heliocentric model is not true. You know, we're the ones revolving around the sun." Well, then, you know, if your religion told you the opposite, you realize, okay, now I have to recalibrate how I assess truth and what that means for myself. Whereas before, the religion explained to you what was true and how it was meaningful and how you could move forward to achieve purpose and so on. So people are naturally looking for freedom as technology changes things, as we see more, as we have access to more. And so we need to keep in mind that that freedom is necessary and that it's a good thing and that we can use it, and that it's more important to realize that we have to use it, in fact, to achieve meaning. But if there's a push back into traditional religion that says, no, you have to ignore a lot of these other things because you see it caused you many issues and pain, then you're going to close off a lot of the freedom that you could use to move forward. And at the end of the day, I do think that there's certain things that don't go back together. Pandora doesn't go back in the box. So the constraints that you would be placing on yourself, well, you don't genuinely accept them because you know deep down what the truths are. So anyway, religion is political in a way, in the sense that you're not part of the religion if you don't believe certain things, or you don't, So uh, you need to be able to well, here I say interpretations must be accepted as a given. That's right. So if you don't accept exactly what they say, then you're going to be ostracized and or brainwashed, right? So some religions won't cast you out, but they'll try to keep you in fact, and make sure that you participate in the ideology. But it might not be what you need. And then we have culture, which is the same. It is political. It's just, in fact, it's pre-political in a way. And I've said this about political correctness. In political correctness, you have this this idea that certain things can't be said in society, but in fact, it's not political at all. It's pre-political, because if it becomes political, and we understand this in a society where free speech is politically supported, we say, look, beyond this addition of violence, you can say whatever you feel and whatever you think, but there are still certain norms that you don't cross. So it's not illegal to cross those lines, those boundaries. So the consequences won't be anything legally related, like going to jail or paying a fine, but you will suffer certain social consequences, because those are the things that we do not say in public and or do. So political correctness is a pre-political thing, in fact, and culture regulates how we behave, different norms, and it influences how we see reality and so on. Because when everybody says and or doesn't say something, so for example, in one society, you can have the fact that everybody takes their shoes off when they come into a home. So when you just do that, you realize that you're not realizing it, but you're being influenced in ways, because you're just practicing by osmosis everyone else's behavior, and in some ways it's just more subtle than others. Obviously, if you're going to walk around with your shoes, someone's going to tell you, hey, don't do that. Um you you're being disrespectful. But there's a lot of things that we don't realize are more subtle in culture that influences you. So what does that mean in so far as it is political? Well, it's political because it regulates how free you are, just in a non-legal way. So I might have really used that term just to stay consistent with the religion thing as political, but I do think that people participate in a culture, and there's its own politics there, right, involved. So we kind of come to an agreement that we shouldn't make it a legal thing, but it's still political because there should still be consequences there. And so how this relates to the meaning crisis is that we need to have more discussion and perhaps test these norms and change them. And in fact, that is what's happening. We see like the younger generations saying things or doing things that are really out of the norm for older generations. Like, I had a friend recently, even in the first few weeks that we got to know each other, definitely didn't know each other well enough for this to happen yet, but he would take out his phone and he'd be texting to a friend, and then all of a sudden would quickly take a photo of put his phone up in my face and take a photo and then send it, as if though he's showing his friend what he's up to and who he's with. And I'm like, did you ask me? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're just taking a photo of me like that? Like, that's so weird. But, this is something that amongst themselves, it's a norm culturally. So we have to be open-minded to it. We have to realize, okay, well, maybe this is a new way of communicating as we're showing people now what we're doing. And we have to discuss, is that a new norm that we can adopt, or maybe we have to constrain that because it is rude or it has some kind of implications in a negative way. I personally think it's rude, but at the same time, there are things that we're going to have to adapt in the future. That one I don't think is necessary, but it's just a personal thing. Then we have authority identified as the enemy. So it's normal for people to be inclined to rebel and here I've said in diametric opposites rather than forging your own way. What do I mean by that? Natural inclination to rebel in diametric opposites. Okay, yeah. So what I mean by that is, okay, take a teenager, they're going to want to do the exact opposite of what they're told, just because they're trying to be free. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they want to do or that they're going to go their own way. They're just going to go in the way that's opposite to what they're told. And I think this happens not just when you're a teenager, it happens when you don't have the political freedom, right? People sense that they're being tyrannized, and they're going to do the opposite of what they're being told to do rather than do what's necessary or required to do. And some of what is necessary to do to achieve meaning moving forward in the future will probably be um, enforced and made illegal, and some things will be encouraged. Who knows? But we need to realize that moving forward, that authority generally is something that we identify as being the enemy, and unless it supports our own interests, but generally we have to make sure that whatever we're going to try to enforce, like new cultural norms, it cannot come from a place of authority. It has to come from a place of more like equal terms, right? Like, I'm a human, you're a human. Let's come to an agreement here that we shouldn't be doing this and we should be doing that. Even though that discussion or that request will come from an authority institution or figure or whatever. So it's important, I do think, to have a bit more of that's the real sensitivity training that's required. I think it comes from authority figures, people who have political power and or executive power in different ways. We're going to have to make sure that they really are working for the people and for the benefit of society by overcoming this authority, this sense of authority. And really, I'm kind of discussing things that have always been necessary and we have always had challenges for, but I think it'll become more important moving forward in ways that we can't conceptualize yet. And then finally, here I have politics in general, the coercion and social engineering. This is what politics is, right? It is to socially engineer how we move forward as a society. We'll have to look into how do we do that, because if we have more freedom now to do different things, I think there will be a lot of moral issues that will arise, and then how we socially engineer those things will be a question that remains to be answered and that I have no answer for now. But I do think that there's going to be stronger and stronger coercion tactics, and there is a difference there. Social engineering is to incentivize people naturally and implicitly. Coercion is more, what's the word? It's more blatant in a way, and we can see this with my current government in Canada. You can't share official news outlets on social media anymore. Um, they've made that illegal. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, that's blatant. That's tyrannical. But there's a reason for it, and they believe it's valid. They say, well, there's too much misinformation and disinformation. We got to combat that somehow. So we're going to coerce people into not sharing disinformation by doing that. You know what I mean? So in the future, there might be some things that are required to be coerced, like there are some things we do now already, right, that we don't consider bad. So that remains to be seen. And the point is, the freedom to pursue freedom is something that happens on these different levels. And at the end of the day, we need to understand that they are required and that there's a balance there to be struck. And that the discussion around it has to be had versus just accepting that, yeah, authority will have to make these decisions however they see fit. Obviously, that's always been a bad idea, but also the opposite, that people should just choose how things run without having a discussion. It's equally an issue. So we have to move forward together as a culture to discuss how we're going to pursue our freedom and to be meaningful without causing any issues on these levels, right? So it's a bit abstract, but I do think it's necessary. Freedom is freedom, and we've seen how necessary it is to a successful life. And yeah, I think that's good enough for us to move forward into the next challenge, which is, yeah, the rich and the poor. Okay, so I'm going to need to say that caveat one more time. And the caveat is that I'm not interested in identity politics, but some things are the way they are. There are some that have, and there are some that have not. And we need to look at how that's problematic for the meaning crisis, because it's creating different erosions, let's say, of meaning in different ways. So we're going to look at that. So first, we have the poor are aware. So for example, when all you have is the internet and you can see other people doing different things with their resources, you tend to feel like your life is meaningless, or you're not doing enough, you're not achieving enough. So it's strange because you have access. So like there's these two tiers of poverty now, we can say, because we said that there are those who just don't have access to the internet, and they're still doing things the old-fashioned way. They're happy. They know that there's probably people out there with phones and planes and doing whatever they want to do, but at the end of the day, they're not exposed to what's happening, so it's not a problem. Then there's the poor people who all they have is access to their devices so that they can go and see how everybody else is living, and that's causing an issue with meaninglessness. There was a study done. I'd have to go and look it up again, but it was a study about poverty and wealth and how it has an impact on happiness. And obviously, meaning is found in joy and being fulfilled and happiness. So the study said that at the time it was something around 65,000 US dollars per year, that up until you reach that level, there is an increase in happiness. And then after 65 or 75, somewhere around there was an actual decrease in happiness again. That the more money you're making, that there's a decrease again. So that could be explained by hedonism to some degree, but also it has to do with what do you call it? It has a lot to do with access to resources. So if you have money and wealth that allows you to go and develop yourself in the ways that you wish, or that you're naturally inclined to, say you're a great musician, but you don't have the money for the instruments that you want to play and learn, obviously it's going to have an impact on your meaning and on your happiness. But after you reach a certain amount of money that allows you to develop yourself and to achieve the meaning, it's too much freedom. It's, you don't know what to do with your money and with your time, and you realize that other people are after your wealth, and you become paranoid and whatever. There's lots of different things that start to happen when you have too much wealth than you know what to do with. So it's a bit of a surprising study, because it really shows that humans don't need that much wealth. And now we're heading into a world where there might be an insane amount of wealth being generated. And obviously, there's all these political issues like how are we going to distribute that wealth more equally so that everyone is capable of having that 65,000 or whatever the price point might be. Um, but at the end of the day, we have to realize that it is a balance. It isn't as simple as just here you go, have lots of money. And in fact, there are a lot of people that, let's say you take someone living in an indigenous community, you know, barefoot most of their lives, sleeping in one room with three or four, five other people. I'm reminded of a video that I saw about this guy. He went to Vanuatu and they don't have one house. They go and sleep in different houses whenever they feel like it. So it's very community oriented, very small place. And I would imagine that people like that having to live or being all of a sudden thrust into a life where they have their own apartments and they can, you know, just have like a standard Western lifestyle, they would be very unhappy even if they were making only 20 grand, right? Just because the lifestyle itself and the extra wealth, it it took them away from what brought meaning to their lives, which was being more communal and spending more time with their family and doing the activities that they enjoyed that were simpler. So, you know, how poverty impacts meaning is a very, very underlooked issue. And we need to observe that. We need to realize that perhaps those who already have wealth on multiple levels might even have a challenge to extract meaning from their lives by moving backward. You know, it's kind of difficult, but I think it is possible. You know, if you go and you live and you change your lifestyle, you realize you don't need as much money anymore, and you get used to not living with the same amount of money. But because of how you've changed your lifestyle, you're happier. This is something that isn't so easy to socially engineer on a large scale. It's got to be an individual decision, right? Um, so I say here the poor are trapped. So they're unable to access wealth and tech to pursue higher meaning. So this is what's going to happen more and more. You see people with cell phones, like Facebook has a program with drones that bring internet to island nations. And I think they even give free devices out. And of course, Facebook is already loaded on the device. So it connects people and it's a noble thing, but at the same time, it isn't, right? It puts them in a new world. And it's just about control to some degree and making the platform keep growing. So that's that awareness that is being brought to these other populations that don't have access to technology is just bringing them into the same problems that we're already dealing with, and perhaps in a greater way because it's a shock. It's like thrown into that world. Whereas if you're a millennial that grew up with this technology, you're feeling the impact of it gradually along with everyone else. So there's the difference there. But I want to give a good example. I have a good friend, a close friend that I used to live with in Germany, and he grew up in the DDR, which is the GDR, German Democratic Republic, and just being a teenager going from the East Germany to West Germany and having all these different options in the supermarkets, like, oh, now there's 25 different brands of coffee that I can have versus the standard one or two that they had in their communist state before. All these freedoms, all these different options, it was overbearing. It was too stimulating. It was he explained to me how it made his life kind of difficult, and it was a bit hard to adapt to. That he was directionless, so there was not enough constraint in his life, right? Um, so the poor are kind of trapped in two ways. You have the first way, which is, well, you have this whole view of what life could be, and you just don't have resources to do it. And two, well, even if you have access to it and you get access real quick, which is likely if the world bumps up and there's this rising wave of the economy moving all the boats up, as we say or use like example, well, then they're going to face those problems. like my friends did moving to West Germany after the wall came down. So that's one major issue. Then we have the fact that it might not be a problem for long because yeah, exponential wealth is coming, adjusting, same yeah, I've already said that. May never be a problem at all. Indigenous wisdom and religion. Okay, so before this possibility that the last 2 or 3 billion people that aren't, or 4 or 5, or however you want to judge it, but if the entire world is bumped up into a new wealth class, if we can manage it, it may be that by the time that happens, the people at the forefront of the meaning crisis are already being will already have solved a lot of these issues in their lives insofar as how to manage wealth and how to go back to living in a way that's more human and or meaningful. So this has a lot to do with indigenous wisdom and religion. So like I said, we're starting to have the conversation around religion, whether we realize it or not. But people, they all say, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, which means that everyone is trying and testing different ideologies and rituals and traditions and different things and coming up with their own little mini religion. And this is starting to coalesce into these new cults and religions, and some are bad and some are good. Some are better than others, and some provide meaning and others just kind of provide entertainment. And it's a big experiment that we're going through. Either way, um, hopefully a lot of that experimentation will lead to more meaning and religious activity that will accommodate us now with the knowledge that we have as a human society, but also with the needs that we're looking to fulfill, right? Community, tradition, ritual, purpose, and meaning. 5 very, very important things. And a lot of that has to do with indigenous wisdom because they're the ones who have carried forward the knowledge of what life is all about and how to be a human being. So this is why you see a lot of moves toward uh, native rituals, and the Western world is looking into Buddhism. You have a lot of Christians. They say, "Oh, I'm Christian, but I'm Buddhist as well." So I think it's gonna be something that will be a bit challenging, just because it's not everyone that has the time to investigate the nature of reality on different levels. And if they do, it often disconnects them from the previous life that they had. Some people go down to South America and do ayahuasca, and then they end up staying there or coming back, but it changes their life entirely. But they come back to a society that they no longer want to be a part of. And at the same time, the life that they can have access to in other parts of the world, well, it's just not, they're not capable of doing it for one reason or another. Paperwork could be one of them. You don't have the visa, or just you can't find a job or whatever. So there's all these little different byproduct challenges that comes um, from having your life turned upside down spiritually as well. And how wealth comes into that remains to be seen, but it's definitely going to be a challenge, and we have to be aware of that. So the last point that I have here is that the rich experience the chaos. I think it's self-explanatory. By rich, like I said, I mean the people who have access to all this tech that's causing the problems. We're the ones seeing how this technology is causing us a meaning crisis. So that's that for challenge number 4. And now, for the next one, we'll be discussing challenge number 5, which is that freedom itself can cause meaninglessness. So if we have too much freedom, it becomes meaningless. We have here relativity. A lot of meaning. A lot of meaning comes from it. So um, I'm going to come up with an example that I like to use in my philosophy, is this idea that you, in relation to, let's say, a banana, you're hungry. So the banana is there, and you in relation to it, the meaning arises from you being able to take it and consume it, and you're no longer hungry. All right, that's great. But that's a very straightforward, um, physical example. When it comes to meaning in that Maslow's pyramid, right, is that as you go up the pyramid, it goes from survival to meaning that you need to have shelter and water and food, at the bottom of the pyramid. By the time that you get to the top, you need to feel fulfilled. You need eudaimonia, like I mentioned earlier. You need to feel like you have purpose and meaning. Now, where does relativity come into those abstract concepts like meaning? So if you're a doctor, for example, meaning arises from you doing what you do, and the person surviving and being able to live the rest of their lives happily with their family. There's meaning that emerges out of that because you were instrumental in that happening. Okay, so the relativity between you and the actions that you've taken as a doctor on your patient causes to you it's meaningful because you know that it's an entire lifetime and you're doing this day in day out. Okay, that's great, but that's personal meaning. That's your purpose as a human being. And then there's even more abstract than that, which is, well, meaning intrinsically. There's all of the world, like the wholeness of existence itself. What is its purpose, or what is its meaning? Why are we around here to be fulfilling our personal purposes to begin with? So we start to lose relativity there when you zoom out. And I'll give you this like literal example of zooming out. Imagine you're floating out into outer space and you see the planet, and all of human history has happened on this beautiful blue and green ball glowing from, the sun. That's great. There's a lot of meaning there. It's you in relation to your planet. And a lot of astronauts have said just how meaningful it has been for them, how it gave them a new perspective and lease on life. So now you start to zoom out even more and you see the galaxy and the stars and the sun, and it's just, wow, the beauty of the universe. Incredibly meaningful because there's beauty and you can enjoy it and experience it personally and so on. And then you zoom out even more, and all of a sudden you don't see any more galaxies. It's just little specks of stars in this just big black background. And all of a sudden you start to see, well, my relativity to the universe is fading away. I'm no longer close to anything anymore. I know it's there, but I don't see it anymore. And then you start to zoom out even more. You don't even see the dots. It's just you floating in space, in darkness, and you can still see your body. You look around, you see your hands. So you in relation to yourself, there's still meaning there. I mean, I exist. I have thoughts. I have emotions. I can imagine things. I had a life before I zoomed out all the way here. So the relativity there is still relevant to you and meaningful, but very difficult. And then all of a sudden, you no longer see your body. You're just a consciousness floating in space, and there's nothing you can, you know, do physically, even though there wasn't really much to do anyway before. But now you don't even have the option to wave your hand in front of your face. There's no relativity there once again. And then suddenly, you can't have certain thoughts anymore. You can't even feel certain things. And you're just an awareness stuck in pure darkness. So you can see how, through this elaborate example, how relativity is incredibly meaningful to us as physical human beings, and that relativity is being stripped away because now just supplant all of these physical examples with more concrete examples. Instead of being taken away from your planet, from your galaxy, your stars, your moon, and all that, you're being taken away from your livelihood. There's no need to do anything, right? There's no need to work to even clean up your house. You have robots doing that for you now. It removes relativity in your life, and therefore meaning. So this is a problem that goes hand in hand with with the freedom that you're being given with these new technologies, right? So how do you counteract that? Right? That's just from relativity. There's other things that make freedom itself the problem. Okay, so we're going to move on to that. Rapid inflation, a lot of meaning lost with freedom. So we just talked about relativity, but now imagine that you no longer have all these responsibilities in your life. You don't have to do anything, but now you have different things you can do because you no longer have those responsibilities. So you can travel more. You can, uh, let's say, everyone decides to have sex with different robots or in the virtual world with all the gorgeous people that they would, want. It's like you have satisfied every primal urge as a human being to eat, uh, hoard all the resources and consume all the food that you want and have sex with everyone you want. Okay, your monkey brain or your lizard brain is satisfied. Then what? All right, well, then we start to look into sadomasochism. Right, you realize, well, there seems to be some kind of pleasure that you can squeeze out of pain and out of lacking things and out of challenges that might be very, very strange to us in the future. Okay. Um, I'll give you one example with the most recent one. There are people online now that they've constrained themselves, they've given themselves less freedom as a human being, and they act like a character, right? And then people can just pay them and send money and these little emojis like a banana, and then the person will have like this pre-recorded response like, oh banana, right? So if that, there's like all these different people online throwing different things that they want this character to do, but they know it's a human being that's doing it. It's kind of very, very twisted because it's not only the person who's deriving pleasure and meaning out of doing this very strange act of being able to be a puppet of all these strangers online, but it's the strangers themselves that are finding some kind of joy and pleasure and meaning by making another human being do that across a virtual platform. All right. So that's rapid inflation, is that we need to do more and more, or find there's like these different ways to use our freedom in order to feel meaningful. And it's not so clear that that's sustainable. I mean, at what point will we just start to destroy ourselves, because there's no longer the capacity to be creative or imaginative, to get meaning? So that inflation happens, and then that's it. You kill yourself, or I don't know, you let yourself go in some way. It's another thing that people don't realize will probably start being a problem very, very soon, and I think is intensely important. So wanted to bring that one up. And then there's communion. Unsustainable now could be possible with freedom. What did I mean with that? Uh, I'm not sure, to be honest. I should have elaborated a little bit more. I do know that we do feel meaning with communion. So when we meet with our families, when we have communion with ourselves, right? Some alone time. Um, it seems to be unsustainable. Well, it's not that it's unsustainable. It is sustainable. I mean, it's something that we do. Uh, I think I think what I mean by that is it's unsustainable through technology. Um, and in fact, it might just be unsustainable, period, because if we have so much freedom to just go and meet different people in different ways, right? You have these different kind of meetup uh, activities and groups. Um, it, it becomes meaningless because you're participating in many different communities, right? You're having communion in with your religion or your sport or your travel club, book club, whatever it is. And at some point, because you've had access, you have too much access, too much freedom to move in and out of these different communities, well, it's unsustainable because there's no longer any meaning. You're not putting enough investment into any one of them for you to have growth. And that's just the nature of time, right? You need to invest more time to achieve more out of one thing. But if you're being a jack of all trades, it might be it could be meaningful to some. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, but at some point you need to create some constraint and move forward to see any growth, right? So that's where I would comment insofar as communion is too much freedom. And then freedom and constraints is what I've been sort of discussing for the last few slides here and there. Is the paradox that ultimately all this means that you need to have constraint in order to feel free in a different way. This is something that young men typically discover when they finally get married, is that, okay, look, if I'm with one woman, I can't date many different women. I can't go out and have fun. I can't just do anything that I want anymore. I'm going to have to take certain responsibilities and so on. So this feeling that you're being constrained, and so you don't want to get married, you don't want to have children, you just want to keep having fun. But because at some point you realize, well, this is a very lonely life. I'm a bit of a slob. I'm getting older. I'm letting myself go. I've been there. I've done that. I've partied. I would rather, or much rather, share my life with someone. So then, what happens is you take that leap. You might have cold feet, but you do it anyway. You get into a serious relationship. You commit. It starts to change you, and then you realize, it wasn't about being imprisoned. It was about experiencing a different freedom, a better freedom, right? The freedom to, because in a way, it is a freedom to be able to sacrifice yourself to something higher, right? Like, wow, I mean, I'm part of something now. I have children. I can enjoy their company. I have a position in my community and I have responsibilities and they depend on me. It's a freedom to feel meaningful, right? And that's where the idea of constraints being something that provides meaning, and that meaning is a higher freedom. Okay, so we need to realize that, because as a society and as a culture generally, and in more ways than one, it's just generally uh, something that exists intrinsic to existence. Okay, to human existence, is that there is freedom in constraint. I love that paradox. Ever since I kind of discovered it writing one day, I was like, man, this is brilliant. All right, so that's the end of challenge number 5. We're going to move to challenge number 6 now, and I believe it's the last one. Here we go. We have challenge number 6, increasing our capability for meaning versus pursuing it. And yeah, the next one is solutions, so we're good to go. Which is good for me because we're coming up on 2 hours here. And here we have the crux of the issue is ultimately everything I've discussed up till now will culminate in this issue that at the end of the day we're going to need to be able to have the capability to feel meaning again, and not just the regular way. We may even need to increase our capability. So, for example, before TV and movies and all that, there was other forms of art. There was theater, and um, I'm not sure if you could quantify it that way, whether there was the ability to feel more meaning, or the capability to experience meaning in a more profound way was something that was enlarged when we had movies and then special effects and all that stuff. And I do think it is true that there's a profundity that you get with different technologies that we adopt over time that allows us to expand how we experience life and how meaningful things can be. Nowadays you can in one day see documentaries and understand how other people live their lives on the other side of the planet, whereas before the internet you didn't have that, right? You couldn't experience all that meaning in one day, and that could be an issue too. Maybe too much meaning itself could be a problem, insofar as if you have so much meaning that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis, well, that itself desensitizes you. There's nothing is meaningful if you're getting if everything is meaningful to you. And that's another philosophical discussion that is just coming to me now. But I don't think that's really relevant because first off, we're having a meaning crisis, so we're not dealing with the opposite of that right now. Of meaninglessness is the issue we're trying to deal with, not too much meaning. And but it's an interesting thing to note anyway. But from here we can move forward to the first point, which is purpose. Is it intrinsically linked to meaning? If so, how else can we achieve meaning given utility as a purpose is disappearing? So technology and so on is creating this useless class, right? It's taking away our purpose, which is what we sort of discussed already with the relativity thing. Purpose is tied to relativity in a way, philosophically speaking. And you can look at it like this. We have a line and you have on this line different points. Okay. So if you as a doctor represent one point and you let's say curing someone of a disease is the goal, is the purpose, that's another point on the line, right? And like we said, there's a relativity between points, using that elaborate example that I had. Well, the relativity really comes from the relationship, that's where relativity comes from, between these 2 points, the doctor and the patient. Purpose would be the points themselves, okay? So if you don't have a goal or a purpose to move towards, then we know that there's no meaning in our lives, okay? Or at least it's required for us. We need actions. We're physical beings. We move, we act, we do things, we function that way. So I do think it's intrinsically linked to meaning. And it's linked to meaning through relativity, like I just gave like example. So then the issue becomes, well, if there's no more points on the line, if there's no more relativity to be had, if there's no more purpose, in other words, to do things in a utilitarian way, which means you can do them. I mean, people no longer need to draw and to paint sculptures at a photorealistic level, but they do it anyway because it's meaningful to them, but purely because it's meaningful, not because there's any utility in it. 300-400 years ago, people had portraits of themselves and all that stuff done because they wanted, there was no other way to record their image. Now we have cameras and so on, right? So it's kind of interesting that technology doesn't necessarily take away the meaning in something, in an activity. You can still perform it, but that's tied to economics, right? Nowadays, if you want to get paid by drawing people, you got to do it in a different way. You got to get good at being a social media person, right? And maybe making money that way through, sure, selling some paintings, but really the money is going to be more coming from the videos that you make in the ad space. You know, that's the world that we're in now. And there are other things that there's just no way to make money from. So there's that. And just even if you could make money, or you don't need to make money, feeling useful to your community is intrinsically meaningful. And if there's someone who's happy digging ditches, it's all they can do, it's all they want to do, they don't need anyone to dig ditches anymore, or to build buildings, or to do any of it, that person may very well feel meaningless because, well, the society doesn't need them anymore. You know, they can go and build buildings all they want, but if they don't have that sensation that, hey, there's someone that's going to be living in this building, there are people that are going to enjoy this, you know, that's an issue. So how are we going to achieve meaning through purpose if that purpose no longer has any utility tied to it? Okay. Um, like I said, we can still do things that are meaningful, but it's greatly reduced if there's no utility behind it. And like I said, there could be this inflation that happens with meaning, where you're doing things that are meaningless just because you're doing them for meaning. Okay, and it becomes kind of a strange thing. So We got to take that into consideration. Then we have representative meaning versus intrinsic and relative meaning. So I want to use this example here. We look at this image that was generated by AI. Okay. I've been using them for the challenges so far, and they hold meaning, right? Like if here we have a bunch of people, trying to one set up a target, which is trying to create a purpose for themselves that they can aim their activities and their energy towards, right, to achieve something. So that's a brilliant image. It's very meaningful. It's relevant to everything that we're talking about here, which is to try to increase our capability for meaning. But it's a representation, okay, of meaning. It's not something that you feel intrinsically is intrinsically meaningful to your life or to you, because well, there's no one that actually drew and put in the time and sweat equity to make this image. Okay, you could argue, okay, well, the AI engineers that did all that they had to do to make this machine do this, okay, whatever. There's meaning there to them, but it's really only once, and then it's done. They've created it, and that's over. So the problem with representative meaning is that we lose meaning every time representation happens, and you can have representation of representations, right? So like before, maybe to sculpt you needed a chisel and a hammer. Now you have different kinds of tools that allows you to sculpt, and they're more automatic, and it's no longer with your hands that much. You're using like some kind of drill or whatever. And then at some point, sculptures can just be made with 3D printers. You built a printer, right? So it's you that sculpted it, but only through the printer. So it's a level removed. And then, and as you keep going forward, is now the printer. It's just you that created the file or the design that gets sent to the 3D printer to make the sculpture, and that's another level removed. So it's representative. You are a sculptor, but it's very far removed now, and it's just you're prompting the art into existence. So it's this loss of meaning through these representative levels, and this is what Jean Baudrillard was talking about in his book and in the Matrix movies, by extension. So we'll talk about that next anyway. But it's this representative meaning that we can feel meaning. Like I feel it's meaningful. I'm using this image now to do this, but at the same time, I didn't come up with it. I didn't have to do anything to achieve it. And then relative meaning is, like I said earlier, the utility aspect. So those two in relation to intrinsic meaning now. Intrinsic meaning has to do with the opposite of representative meaning, whereas you're so far removed. It's something that you don't even need to act in order to achieve that meaning. It's this realization that meaning is infused in existence in general, and you being, breathing. That comes with a lot of meditation. Some people do different rituals or medicines, and sometimes making love. You feel existential, right? Part of everything. Everything is meaningful. That intrinsic meaning is something that can become a problem because we chase it specifically through these other means. So like I always say about medicines, people doing ayahuasca or any kind of medicine, if they do it to chase that meaning, it becomes a drug. If they do it to understand themselves and to move forward, and they're doing it for the right reasons, so that they can face the darkness and do the work, then it's a medicine. Okay, so there's a very subtle difference between a medicine and a drug, and anything can be a medicine and or a drug. So if we want to achieve that transcendental meaning, that intrinsic meaning of everything, it's going to be very dangerous because one, we're going to move towards trying to get it much quicker once we move forward into this meaning crisis. Existential crisis tends to make people do very extreme things, and when they do those extreme things, they do them again, out of fear and out of need and desperation. And so if they do try to get that intrinsic meaning out of that fear, it's going to cause even bigger problems, because you're going to become a drug addict in different ways, right? You could be enslaved to a certain game, or certain um, plant, or whatever it is, or activity. Okay. So this is something that's always been a problem, but it's just going to be exacerbated a lot more now, because we're going to have more freedom to do things, more wealth. And if we don't, well, it's always been a problem anyway. So, simulation, finding meaning and purpose versus transcending relative purpose to achieve being. Yeah, it's pretty much what I just explained. Um, so there's nothing else to really say for challenge 6. It's really the final one. We have to come together and look at these challenges as challenges, is really what I want to say. I want to thank everyone for listening so far. It's been close to 2 hours, and I'm quite exhausted now. That was a lot. But we're going to do a second video for the solutions. And again, this is all about being positive. I've discussed these things hopefully in a way that is objective and that shows people that, we can tackle these challenges. They're not something that's inexplicable. We're aware of them. There are ways to overcome them, and that's what I want to discuss in the solutions portion of this presentation. So, thanks again for all the time, for listening. I would love to hear more opinions. There's other things I'm sure that I missed, and some things I could have explained better. But at the end of the day, that's the whole point. We can come together. We can have a starting point. We can move forward and achieve success in this meaning crisis. Once again, my name is James Sirois, and I'll see you in the next video.